Ashish, is that how you pronounce your name?
Yes.
It's great to have you on. Really appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation with me. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
I write about, Vedic philosophy. Vedic philosophy has been studied as, religion, sometimes as history, and sometimes as, poetry. But it's the scientific components uh, of Vedic philosophy or the scientific understanding has not been presented. So that's what I do.
Cool. Could you tell me more about Vedism? What is Vedism and what are the reasons to believe in Vedism?
Uh, are you asking me a question?
Yeah,
Uh,
tell us more about Vedism.
okay. Yeah, Veda is a term that comes from the root Vid, which means to know, and Veda therefore means knowledge, and uh, it's a summarized form of knowledge. The world is also knowledge in this philosophy, and the source of knowledge is also knowledge, right? So basically, knowledge expands into knowledge, and knowledge is summarized as Veda. And so when we talk about Vedism, you can say knowledgeism, which is what I sometimes use the term semanticism. The world is meaning, and what kinds of meanings there are, and how meaning constructs our experience, and so on. So what are the reasons to believe in Vedism? Uh, you have to experience it. The experience is the main reason, and there is a process to experience. So, for example, if I say, what are the reasons to believe in trees or apples for that matter? So, you would have to experience trees and apples. And so, there is a process for experience, and that's the uh, primary reason for accepting anything. We don't use the word believe. Why should I believe in it? uh, there is no answer for it. There is no reason for you to believe. The If you want to experience, there is a path to experience, and when you experience, it's no longer called belief. So uh, whatever we call as evidence, we can sometimes use the word evidence. And there are three kinds of evidence primarily. There are many kinds of evidence, but three primarily. The first is experience. It's called pratyaksha, which is, aksha means seeing, and pratya is seeing individually or seeing directly. So that is one. And then there is anumana, which is inference. So sometimes you see something, and you think there must be an explanation of what I'm seeing, and you try to explain that observation through it, and that's generally called inference in Western philosophy, or in English generally. So there is an explanation of that, and if you try to explain your experience, that's an inference. So that is, and if those inferences are logically coherent, consistent, and things like that, that is another reason. And there is a tradition, uh, which is also called Shabda. But some people may not like the tradition. Some people love the tradition because there's a long tradition of historical discussion, and combined with arguments and reasoning and things like that. But one has to know what that history is for tradition to appeal. So for somebody who doesn't know that tradition, we can say experience and inference. Those are the two uh, primary, reasons or experience. evidence, forms of evidence.
And how do you define knowledge? In my view, knowledge is a justified true belief. I use the JTB theory of knowledge. So how do you define knowledge, and what do you mean when you say the source of knowledge is knowledge? Because to me that seems like a contradiction.
Yeah, so uh, let's take an example. You can say, let's say physics is knowledge, right? Chemistry is knowledge, mathematics is knowledge. So you are supposing there is something knowledge itself, which makes physics, mathematics, chemistry, and so on as knowledge. But you wouldn't say the reverse, which is you wouldn't say that knowledge is physics or knowledge is mathematics, knowledge is chemistry, and so on. So you think of a class of things that you call knowledge, and that class includes biology, mathematics, physics, and so on. So, uh, so what you can ask what knowledge is itself, right? And in Western philosophy, you would think in terms of, there's a Platonic form, you can call it truth or knowledge or whatever. But there is something of which there are many instances and subclasses and so on. So what that is for us, you can say God. So God is, so there are different classes of knowledge also. Two broad classes. One is called dual knowledge, other is called non-dual knowledge, and so on. So God is defined as non-dual knowledge, and it requires some discussion. What is the difference between dual and non-dual, and so on? But basically, the table that you are seeing, or the chair on which you're sitting, your body, your mind, everything is knowledge, and the and this knowledge is essentially a semantic category. So it expands and to create many different classes and subclasses and so on, and instances of knowledge. So the world is knowledge, you are knowledge, and it has all come from an original thing that we can call knowledge itself.
So I would say knowledge is a belief that corresponds to a fact of reality. So there's a bunch of facts. The moon is 255,000 miles away. And if I have a belief that the moon is 255,000 miles away, and that belief is justified by some kind of evidence, and it's true, then I would classify that as knowledge. But I wouldn't say my body is knowledge. I would say that I believe I have a body would be knowledge, but I don't think my body itself would be a knowledge thing. I think that objects don't or can't be knowledge. Um, so how do you like, do you think knowledge is just any existing thing, like reality itself is knowledge?
Yeah, because okay, so a very fundamental question is, for example, you said you in trying to define knowledge, you use two other terms: evidence and belief, right? And fact. So there is a fact which constitutes evidence, which then leads to my belief. Am I correct in
Mhm.
characterizing you?
Yep.
Right. So you would have trouble defining what a fact is, what evidence is, and what belief is without, because in trying to define what a fact is, you would have to in turn invoke some knowledge. How do you know there is a fact? So your awareness or your knowing of the fact itself, suppose there is a process of knowing, and you have to know that process of knowing in order to know the fact. So knowledge
Hmm.
has to be defined in a more fundamental sense than a fact. Similarly, if you talk about a belief, there is a point at which you come to know a fact, and then you know that you have a belief. So knowing that belief becomes even more fundamental than the belief itself.
I'm not. I think I understand your argument is that um, you have to have knowledge in order to define the terms fact, justified, and belief, which I agree to that. But I don't think that because you need to know the the structures of logic and the definitions of terms, that because of that use those terms to define knowledge. So, like, I can define uh, a, a mammal as a organism that doesn't lay eggs, that has fur and has a, digestive tract and a vertebrae. And obviously, to know all of those words, I need to know English, but nothing about English is intrinsic to the definition of mammal. It just happens to be the case that that's the language we use to describe mammals. And the fact of what makes something a mammal is independent of the language we use. And so the language we use to describe knowledge, justified true belief, is made up. But the things they describe, so facts of reality, that isn't determined by our definitions. That isn't determined by knowledge. That is just something that's there regardless of any knowledge. So I think that if all human minds disappeared, there would be no more knowledge, there'd be no more beliefs, but reality would still be there. There'd still be true facts about the universe. But
Yeah, that's okay. So if you had to define any language, right, you can come up, forget about English, any formal language or any language that uses concepts. What you will have to begin with the most fundamental concept as knowledge. And you know, if you want to define a mammal, for example, it doesn't matter. The mammal is a word. You know what we understand what you mean by a mammal. But to experience what a mammal is, or to know what a mammal is, you would have to have, let's say, a sense of sight. Okay, that's a category of knowing. Similarly, you will have to have a mental faculty to conceptualize or generalize and put lots of different things into a category which you want to call mammal. Calling is one of the methods of knowing, but there's a conceptual knowing, which is also a category of knowing. Okay. Similarly, if you say, I know I exist or I think I exist, you are already assuming that you can know that I'm thinking and I know that I exist, right? There is a sense in which, so everything is a subcategory of knowing. If you were to try and construct a formal language or uh, any system of reasoning in which you had a high fundamental concepts, derived concepts, further derived concepts, and so on, you will have to have knowledge as the most fundamental concept.
I don't think I would agree, because I'd say that I could believe I don't exist. I could have the belief that I don't exist at all, but I'd be wrong. I would be incorrect. And so, in that case, I have a belief, but I don't have knowledge. So knowledge wouldn't be the most fundamental thing. There'd have to be something more fundamental than belief, because I can have something else first. I can have a belief. I can have a wrong belief. And since I can have a wrong belief without having knowledge, then it seems like knowledge isn't the most fundamental thing. And that I
Yeah,
think,
yeah, we might be using a very English nuanced sense of knowing, where there's a difference between knowing and belief, and so on. The term that we use is jnana. Jnana is there is no way to translate many of these words into English. But uh, if I were to construct any system of reasoning, logic, conceptual framework, what would be the most fun? What would be axiomatic? For
A
example,
equals
yeah.
A, law of identity.
Pardon me.
The law of identity, A equals a thing is itself. A does not equal not a thing is not itself. The law of identity, law of excluded middle, and law of non-contradiction, laws of logic would be fundamental, axiomatic.
Yeah, I can, if you spend some time, I can show you why we reject all those concepts. We don't, and do you want to go into that discussion of why logic is problematic?
Sure.
Okay. So, if you want to just talk about law of identity, okay, where you say A is A, okay, and so if you say, Ashish is a cruel man, or Ashish is a man, or whatever, right? Or he is cruel, and then A is A means Ashish also always has to be cruel. He cannot be kind. or Ashish is, uh, a father, then he cannot be a friend. He cannot be. So basically, A is A eliminates contextualization of anything. You have to be one thing and you have to be only that thing. You cannot be sometimes a father, sometimes a son, sometimes a husband, sometimes an employee, and so on. There's one thing cannot be different things.
Well, I agree.
And
One
one thing
thing,
cannot be multiple things.
well, that part I'm not exactly understanding, because I could say a mammal is a mammal, but that means multiple things, because a mammal is something that has fur, something that has a vertebrae, something that has a digestive system, something that has that reproduces without using eggs. And so, even though a mammal is a mammal, A equals a mammal is made up of a bunch of different things, a bunch of different properties. And so, anything that has all of those properties will be a mammal. But it doesn't mean that it has to be specifically only one property. It can be a collection of properties. So, like
Yes, and
Ashish,
but
Ashish has
but
to be
you never,
Ashish, which means like you have to be how tall you are, or who you are consciously, what your consciousness is. All of the facts about what make you you are going to be true, and even if those are a bunch of different facts.
yeah, but this is something you're saying, in terms of ordinary language, right? We are comfortable with this ordinary language, but ordinary language does not, abide by A is A. If you go back to what how Aristotle defines the principle of identity, is a thing is identical to itself. It cannot be anything else. So if Ashish is a mammal, then he cannot be, or in this case, if he's a father, he should not be a son, because you think of these as opposite categories. Or basically, A is A means you have, if you have A equals B, then A, if A equals C, then B must equal C,
Yeah, that's the law of
right?
transitivity.
Right. So if you say Ashish is cruel and Ashish is kind, then cruel equals kind.
I don't think so. So a person can be both cruel and kind to different groups. So I can be cruel to one group and kind to a different group. So
That is
races,
contextual knowledge. That is not universal truth.
right? But
That
that
makes,
would still be a part of me. So I would still be me, even if I was kind to one person and
yes,
mean to another. And so it's not a contradiction to say that Tom or Ashish is both kind and cruel. Um, they're just not kind and cruel at the same time in the same way. So, like, if I was um, both kind and
hold
cruel,
your thought there. Just hold
what?
your thought there. It's, you have already introduced not at the same time, not at the same place, not relationship to the same person. Okay, I accept all that you're saying, but this is not part of logic, because a logical truth is true for all times, all places, all persons, always,
Sure.
right? So introducing time and space and individual and context and so on, this is itself not principle. This doesn't go with the principle of identity. Principle of identity or logical truth will assume that it is a universal truth. Something logically true is true in all possible universes. So it cannot be true here and not true there. It cannot be true now and not true in another place.
I'm not. I'm not sure I understand that. So, for example, I am holding a pineapple. That could be true in one possible universe, but not true in another. But the pineapple is the pineapple, and that would be true in all possible universes. And so you can have both something that's contingently true, true in some possible universes, without violating what's necessarily true, the laws of logic. Because the laws of logic can describe things in particular contexts without
But you
violating
have you
themselves.
have changed the example from yourself, which can be kind and cruel, to an pineapple, which you're assuming is one thing. But even the thing that you are, even if you were to describe a pineapple, it could be green on one side and yellow on the other.
Sure, because that wouldn't be a criterion that would make it not a pineapple. So, like, it couldn't be
Agreed.
a pineapple and also not a pineapple, but it could be a
Yes.
pineapple and also any different colors. It could be any color and still be a pineapple. And so there are variables that can change and variables that can't change. So for me, I would be me even if I'm kind or even if I'm cruel. So I could be either one of those. But I wouldn't be me if I was you, because if I was you, then I wouldn't be me. And so
Agreed.
some things can change about my personality and I'd still be me. So A would still equal A. But if some things change, which are like the things that are inherent to my identity, then I would no longer be me. And so there's some necessary set of conditions that can't change for A to equal A. But there are some things that can change, and I'd still A would equal A, like my age. I am myself, even if I'm 1 year old or 50 years old. I am myself if I'm 6 feet tall or if I'm 4 feet tall. But I'm not myself if my brain is removed and squashed into jelly because then I've lost all my consciousness. So if I my consciousness is destroyed, then I am no longer me. And so there are some properties that can be changed and I'd still be me, but some can't be changed.
I am not denying anything that you're saying, but I'm saying that's not logic. That's not compatible with Aristotelian logic or principle of identity. Ordinary language allows all these things. Ordinary language allows perspectives, right? A
Sure.
person can have many relationships which are which many aspects of your personality, for example, which are revealed to different people in different contexts, places, and times. Okay, but that is not compatible with logic.
Why not? Because I think it is. Like we have logical structures that express conditionals or like
No,
um
you can't, because if you have a criminal, for example, like we just said, uh, X is a criminal, X is honest. X is
yep,
honest in relationship to his brother, X is a criminal relationship to his business partner. So X is, honest is not a universal statement. X
sure,
is a criminal is also not a universal statement. They are both contextual statements,
sure.
right? And you cannot fit that contextuality in logic unless you add modalities, which I call these modalities, we call these modalities, but unless you add modalities like time and space and person and situation into logic.
Well, I don't
But
think
that
you need to
logic,
add those into logic. So, like any logic can say that there are some necessary properties and contingent properties without space or time. So, like you can say that there is a necessary set of properties for P. P must be X, Y, and Z, and it can have properties A, B, and C. So, if P must
but
be X, Y, and Z,
this is why we used opposites, kind and cruel, criminal and honest. So you will have the problem. So you can say I have necessary set of properties, then you get a logical contradiction. How can A be both honest and dishonest? How can A be both kind and cruel?
well, it can't be a logical contradiction. Like it can't be a round square, so it can't be P and not P. But it can be um, different things together. So you can be kind and cruel. You can be both of those at the same time. So like there's a thing where you I forget what it's called, where there's a underhanded comment where you say something that is kind of nice but also mean at the same time. So you can be both kind and cruel. That's not a contradiction. A contradiction would be
That's that's
kind
different,
and not kind. Kind and not
right?
kind would be
Yeah, I'm not talking about mixing those kind of qualities in some specific situations. I'm talking about, so everything has many aspects and perspectives. Those perspectives are not always seen, they're not always visible. Okay. And therefore, that knowledge about something that you see only in a certain perspective is a contextual knowledge. It cannot be universalized, even though it exists potentially, but it is not visible or observed, right? My kindness may not always be visible. My cruelty may not always be visible, but the potential for cruelty and kindness is there in me,
Sure.
right? So
Yeah.
you can say I'm both kind and cruel, but somebody may say, look, when I observed it or when I observed him, he was only cruel. He was not kind. So
Sure.
from my perspective, I only see his cruelty. But somebody may say, look, I have got this other evidence where he has exhibited his kindness. So he is also kind. And then you get a logical contradiction. How can both things, how can the same thing be, how can the same person be both kind and cruel? And the way you will reconcile that is to say that the person is neither kind nor cruel, but there is a potential for both.
Well, I would say he's not entirely kind or not entirely cruel. He's partially kind and partially
Agree.
cruel.
You can say that too. You can say that too.
So if I said Ashish is Ashish and Ashish is kind and Ashish is cruel, that wouldn't be a contradiction. Just like if I said a ball is partially red and a ball is partially green, wouldn't be a contradiction. Or if I said a ball is red and a ball is green, it would be a contradiction if I said a ball is entirely red and a ball is entirely green. So if
Agree.
I said, go
Yeah,
ahead.
which is fine. Which is fine. But the point I'm trying to make is that if let's say one face or half the ball was red and the other half was green, and you saw the green part, and another person saw the red part, they will disagree and they will be correct, and yet they will be incorrect in universalizing their idea.
Yes. So they'd be wrong. So they'd be wrong to say that the ball is entirely red because it's only half
Yes.
red. But if I said A equals A, that would only apply to the full nature of the ball. So the ball being the ball would entail all of its properties, regardless of what I think. So if I think the ball's red, I'd just be wrong. It wouldn't be knowledge. Or if he thinks the ball's green, he would just be wrong. Now, if I thought the ball was half red and half green, then I would be correct. That would be true. And that part is the part that's the universalizable part. The A equals A is whatever the fundamental nature of the ball is itself, no matter how many properties there are, regardless of what I think about it. So even if I think the ball is fully red, I would just be incorrect. That would not be true.
You cannot formalize this any, because the assumption in logic is all the principles of logic. If you prove something logically, right, you can say bachelors are unmarried men. That's
Yeah.
true in all, possible. That is the meaning of logical truth. It's true at all places, at all times, for all people, in all situations. But when what the kind of the problem with logic that I'm talking about is contextuality. A ball has two faces. You may have only seen one face. So it comes down to the evidence, right? So you may say, okay, show me the evidence, but I may not be able to turn the ball to show you the other side, right? Or if you have only seen one side of the ball or one aspect of a person, you don't know the person fully, but you say, hey, I saw it and I saw this, right? I saw cruelty, therefore the person is cruel. I saw the ball is green, therefore the person. And your observation is not incorrect, but your conclusion is still incorrect because you have not seen the opposite side.
I still don't understand how that violates logic because logic can describe that pretty well. It's conditionals. Conditionals describe that. So under condition X, P equals P. Under condition Y, P equals not P. So you can describe that with logic. I don't see why that would be an issue.
But that
But
is not principle of identity. Okay, you can formulate a different system of reasoning in which you can say X can be A, B, and C, right? You are attributing multiple properties to that. But even then, okay, when you say X is A, B, and C, it is X is, if you make an observation, X is simultaneously A, B, and C. because that's how you will reason in logic. Okay, you would say, if you say x is a, b, and c, then x is a and simultaneously it is b and simultaneously it is c.
Well,
And all things that you make about x would be completely applicable to x. Think about it,
I
if
don't.
you allow contextual, see, this is a bigger fundamental problem in mathematics and in linguistics and so on. Okay. And the problem goes back to logic, because any logical proof is a universal truth. If you have proven something logically or mathematically, you have proven a universal truth. But what if truth is not universal? What if it has many faces, which you see sometimes and don't see sometimes, which you can prove sometimes and not prove other times? And the only way you can resolve that is you bring in time, place, person, context into logic. But that is not contextual, that is not Aristotelian logic, or that is not universal truth. It is contextual truth.
I still don't understand how that violates logic, because logic, from my perspective, explains that very well. But tell me more specifically how this would apply to Vedism. What is it that? What are the things that Vedism describes as part of the universe, the fundamental nature of the universe?
Everything, everything has many aspects. And you know uh, and when you perceive something, like I'm looking at you, I'm seeing one aspect of you, but your other friends or your relatives or other people will see different aspects of you. So just the fact that I saw you doesn't mean I know you, because I saw one aspect of you, and other people could see completely opposite aspects, right? Cruel and kind, green
Sure.
and red, and so on. So, one fundamental thing where we got started from here is that this conception of logic as universal truth is, not we don't accept, because we accept that reality, or we talk about reality as many perspectives. Okay, so for instance, if you're looking at a, different objects that you're looking at, they are also different aspects of reality. So if you look at a table, you don't say, hey, I don't see reality. It is also reality, but it is an aspect of reality. Similarly, if you see a different person, you're seeing a different aspect of reality. Okay. So then the question is, if these are simply aspects, then what is reality? It's the same question that we went back, that we, talked about in terms of knowledge. If mathematics is knowledge, physics is knowledge, chemistry is knowledge, but they are only aspects of knowledge. They are parts of knowledge. Okay? Knowledge is not mathematics. Knowledge is not physics. Knowledge is not biology, and so on. So they are different aspects of knowledge, and yet knowledge is something different from all of these. Okay, so that's the same question as, why do you say the fundamental concept is knowledge? I can say the fundamental concept is reality. Okay, and the next question would be, if there is reality, is it knowable? Right? So you have to say, well, there is reality. It makes sense only if the reality is knowable. And when it is, if it is knowable, then you can say, yeah, it must exist as knowledge, which I may not know, but I can know. So then the concept of reality and the concept of knowledge must become equal, because there is no meaning in talking about unknowable reality.
Well, I can say there's lots of things about reality I don't know. How many grains of sand are on Alpha Centauri? I don't know. I don't know that. That's unknowable. But it is still a part of reality. There is a truth to it. It is true, even if we don't know it. So even if 0 people know the fact, it's still going to be part of reality. So it seems like it
That's
says,
an assumption. That is, I have no problem with that claim or statement, right? But I'm saying if you're talking purely in a logical or philosophical sense and say what is the meaning of reality if it is not knowable? I'm not saying you may not know. I mean, you may not know the number of particles of sand and so on, right? But it is in principle knowable. If it was unknowable, then there would be no point in talking about how many particles exist because it's simply not knowable.
sure, but something could be unknowable. So it's like our brains would be unable, our consciousness is too small to understand it, but it could still be true. Like, say, um, the the size of the universe or something. Like if we're trying to imagine all of the stars at once, we wouldn't be able to do it. There's too many. Our brains couldn't handle that information, but it's still going to be true. So even if there's something that we can't know because it's too big or too profound for our consciousness, it could still be true. And so even if there is things that are not knowable, like the level of the fluctuations on us, all of the fluctuations of flames on a star at once, it's still true, even though it's unknowable.
If you make that claim, I can just flip it in a second. I can say, your consciousness is too small to know God, and but God is still true.
Sure, I would agree that is possible.
Okay. So philosophically, you know, uh, making that claim amounts to what people call metaphysics in Western philosophy, right? Physics is what you can perceive. Metaphysics is what is beyond perception, what you cannot perceive, right? And metaphysics is a derogatory word, for most people. It is also used as a derogatory word. So to say that reality is in principle maybe in principle unknowable is basically the same argument is to say that God is too big for us to be known or God is too complex to be known by us.
Well, I'd
And
say that
I'm not in principle denying. So I'm not. So my basic point is if there is some reality, we assume, okay, let's call it an assumption for the time being that it is knowable. Otherwise, there is no point in talking about reality, something that's completely unknowable, right? So if you, for instance, somebody said, well, nature is working according to, some laws, but we can never know those laws. Okay. There's no point in making such a statement because it's equivalent to saying that maybe there are no laws.
I don't think so. I think those would be two different things. So saying that there are laws but we can never know them is different than saying there are no laws. Um, so, for example, I can say there are things I don't know, but saying that there are no things is a knowledge claim. It's saying that if there are no laws, I can know there are no laws. But that's different from saying there could be laws I don't know. So, like, there's the political quote from some politician: known knowns, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns. There are things that we can express as possibilities that we don't know, even if they are still true about reality. So I think it's important to keep that part of our worldview to say that there can be things that are unknown or unknowable, but still can be true about reality.
Unknown is fine. I have no problem with things that are unknown. I'm only questioning the idea that in principle unknowable, right? There's a difference between I don't know what's the weather in, let's say New York, but I can know.
Well, I think there are some things that are unknowable. I think we've shown that, like in philosophy, there's P or NP, the problem of P or NP. That's unknowable. It's an unknowable problem. Gödel's incompleteness theorem is unknowable. It says that
No,
any formal system
I
of
no,
logic.
no, no. No, no. Just because that's why I said, Gödel's incompleteness has a Gödel's incompleteness itself is a problem of logic at a very deeper level. But if you accept Aristotelian logic, or what Gödel proved as the completeness of logic itself, if you fix the logic as universalist logic, let's call that universalist logic, in the sense that if your logical truth is true in all possible universes, if you accept that, then you have Gödel's incompleteness. But you can flip the problem and say that I can solve Gödel's incompleteness if truth is not universalist truth. That's what I have done in one of the books, demonstrate what the problem is. But it requires you to accept that logical truth is contextual truth, or can be contextual truth,
Well, like I think
which
there's
changes your conception of reality, in the sense that reality is not one thing. It is actually a potential or possibility of many things. And I see one of the potentials at one time in one place.
well, so there's the thing in physics where you can't know a particle's momentum and energy at the same time, or something like that. I forget what it's called. Direction.
Uncertainty.
Yeah,
Yeah,
uncertainty.
uncertainty principle.
So it's unknowable. You can't know both of those things at the same time, but it's still true that reality has these things.
Yeah, I can. So you are picking many examples, and I will, if you like, I can go into one of those examples and say why that problem exists and why it is not in principle unknowable. But if you use a certain methodology of knowing, i.e., in this case, binary logic and universalist conception of truth, then it is definitely unknowable. Or according to Bell's inequality, which said, in quantum mechanics, essentially, if you try to fix that problem without changing your logical and conceptual way of thinking, you will end up in a contradiction, which is essentially a logic problem, right?
I think it's more of an epistemology problem, which isn't a logic problem. So
No. See, Gödel's incompleteness simply says every system of arithmetic is either inconsistent or incomplete. Okay?
yeah.
Either inconsistent or incomplete. And we say, oh, we don't like inconsistency. Therefore, we call it incompleteness theorem. But we could say that, hey, let's change this, incompleteness back to inconsistency. And why is it inconsistent? It is because logic is incapable of dealing with contextuality. So the Gödel's claim, which is called incompleteness theorem, can also be transformed into an inconsistency theorem.
I don't think so. I think it's either or. So like the reason it would be incomplete is because there's going to be unresolvable statements like the Russell's
That's
paradox.
fine. That's
But
fine.
but that's different from
But
being inconsistent. Those are two separate. Those are different things. They're not the same thing.
they're not the same thing. I'm not saying they are the same thing. I'm saying it's an either or statement. It's mathematics is either incomplete or inconsistent. We choose we choose consistency, and therefore we get incompleteness. But we could choose the reverse, and then it would that is another deeper topic. If you I don't know which which topic we are discussing now, because the title is reasons to believe in Vedism, and I said Veda is knowledge, reality is knowledge. Okay, and I basically stated that the most fundamental concept is knowing, and that concept is identical to reality. And then we talked about many aspects of reality, right? So, what is knowledge itself? It's something that transcends different, parts of knowledge, or different things that we call knowledge. Similarly, what is reality? It transcends the different things that we see, but they're aspects of reality.
So are there things in reality that are not knowledge?
No, everything is knowable. You may not know it right now.
Well, is knowable the same thing as knowledge?
Knowable is not the same thing as knowledge because I might not have seen it, right? I might not have encountered it. So it is in principle knowable, which is what you call reality, right? Facts. What you call facts is not a fact for everybody. So it is potentially a fact. It can potentially be known, it can become my knowledge. I can know that fact. So right now, because I don't know it, therefore it's simply a potential. To realize the potential needs a process, right? I need to, let's say I have not seen a certain sea beach, but I can see that sea beach, but I need to go there. So I need to follow a path, I need to follow a process, I need to see that. So potential becomes actual by an activity or a process.
So would you say reality is knowable is more accurate than reality is knowledge? Because not everything is knowledge, but you'd say everything is knowable.
Yes, everything is knowable is a universal statement. You can make that, right? Everything is knowable. But the question is, does somebody know everything?
I would say no. I don't think anybody knows everything.
Okay. So in Vedism or in Vedic philosophy, we would say that yes, there is an omniscient person who knows everything. In principle, it is knowable. You can also know it. And but can somebody know everything? Yeah, that's an omniscient person.
I don't think anything can be omniscient. So like, can a being know everything and also know what it's like to be ignorant or know what it's like to not know something? Seems like that's a contradiction.
Come again. Repeat that, please.
Can a being know everything, be omniscient, and also know what it's like to not know something? So
Why not? Why is that? You can have a person who's childlike, okay, who feigns or pretends or acts he is ignorant, and an adult like who actually knows. It's the same problem of aspects, right? One aspect is cruel, the other aspect is kind. One aspect is green, the other is red. So one aspect can be ignorant, the other aspect knowledgeable. Supremely ignorant and supremely knowledgeable, or completely ignorant and completely knowledgeable.
I don't, so like it has two personalities and one knows everything and one does not know everything.
Yes.
But if one does not, one has the knowledge of not knowing, while the other one does not have that knowledge. So one aspect of it knows what it's like to not know something, but the aspect that's omniscient doesn't have that. It's missing that, which means it's not omniscient.
No, no, we don't. You are assuming, again, you are going back to this binary logical conception, right? Either A is A or A is not A, or either A is X or A is not X. But I'm saying this binary logical conception involves a conception of reality in which you know all the aspects. Every perception or every observation or every statement involves all the aspects. I'm disputing that fundamental claim. If I have a cup, I can see one side of the cup and I cannot see the other side of the cup, right? But one side may be printed with a logo, the other side not printed with a logo. And I can say, oh, this cup has this logo, and somebody else may say that cup doesn't have a logo. That binary opposite, both are true, but you need to be in the right context, the right relationship to make either of those claims.
Hmm. Why? Because it seems like the position you're taking is a lot harder to understand or to use in thinking about reality. So why would we adopt that position as opposed to the more classical, logical, scientific position?
Because Everybody uses this position that I am describing. I already said one person can be kind and harsh or cruel at the same time. And we don't have a problem in conceptualizing. We have a problem in using such a concept in mathematics, in logic, and physics. But in everyday language, we have no problem, right?
Gotcha.
There is no contradiction in saying that so and so is a president of a country and so is a father, and and so on. You can apply numerous adjectives, but you may not see all the adjectives at the same time.
Gotcha. We have a few questions from the audience, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Winston's mom asks, "Is Ashish talking about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, our hidden shadow self?"
I am sorry, I don't know what is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
I think
You
he's
have
talking
to.
about the dual aspects. You mentioned like the dual aspects of God, the one who knows everything and the one who's ignorant.
Yeah, this is a very general principle. I'll give you a very relevant and pertinent example. If you have a plate of food in front of you, okay, we think that we see the food, we taste the food, we smell the food, and touch the food at the same time. But that's not true. Our consciousness goes from taste to touch to smell to sound to sight in some order. Okay, that order is not fixed. Some people will dwell more on the smell, some will dwell more on the sight, some will, shift from different. So, taste, touch, smell, sound, sight, for example, just simple perception is itself multiple aspects. So, you say, I smell the food, I see the food, I taste the food. But food is not smell, food is not taste, food is not, what you see. So there is something you are seeing and smelling and tasting, and you call that food, but you never see food, right? Food is something, you can say it's a combination of taste, touch, smell, sound, sight, okay? And but you don't get all the things at the same time. So whether you're talking about Jekyll, and I don't exactly know what is Mr. Jekyll and Hyde, but I'm talking about everything that you're perceiving, everything that is in front of you. This is not strange mysterious philosophy or something out of the world. Every single experience involves shift from one aspect to the other aspect. It's constantly moving and very fast.
Gotcha. Um, Next question from Mojo. Does Hinduism have a timeline from start to finish, from creation to end times?
Yes, there is a timeline. It's 315 trillion years.
Gotcha. Um, how Theological introspection asks, how could a being have knowledge of something it hasn't experienced yet?
How could a being have knowledge of something it hasn't experienced yet? Well, like I said, there are, three types of evidences we offer, right? Or three types. So one is direct experience, but you are ruling that out. You're saying, what if I haven't experienced it? Uh, the next approach could be you can infer it, right? For example, you can say, well, if the weather is very hot right now, it must be the sun is, shining. And if it is weather is cool, maybe there's wind blowing or the sun is not out. But those inferences, there are many, ways to explain an observation, right? So you cannot be sure that your inference is correct, and therefore you have to broaden your um, perception. The third way is to rely on a tradition. Okay, the tradition says these are the things. People call it faith and so on. But faith is something that can never be verified. On the other hand, you can take a tradition and say, well, it says these, it makes these claims, and I can, let's say it makes 50 claims. I can verify two claims, so I can trust it because not 100%, but let's say 2%, because I can verify only. But still, as you go on verifying more claims, you have greater trust, right? So it goes like that. But ultimately, unless and until you have direct experience, there is always an element of doubt whether you have rationally reasoned about it or you have relied on a tradition. So ultimately, experience is the confirmation.
Gotcha. Nothingness asks, does reality have causal closure?
Push him on naturalism. Does reality have causal closure? What do you mean by that?
I think that means like, does everything in the universe, um, is that the extent of all causes? Is there something that causes outside of the universe? It's a causal closure
Um,
principle in philosophy.
yeah. Does the universe have causal closure? You mean to say, did the universe come out of its own and there is nobody else triggered it? Is that what you're asking?
It's like epistemic closure. It's a principle that says we know things we believe on the grounds that they are jointly implied by several separate known items. Closure principle.
Okay, let me answer it in the way I understand it, and I am not sure if I might answer it correctly. But does everything have a causal explanation? Answer is yes, right? Is anything happening randomly, irrationally, probabilistically? The answer is no. Probability is also an appeal to a certain form of ignorance. Indeterminism is also an appeal to certain form of, ignorance. So everything has a cause, everything has a reason, and does it mean that everything is inside the universe? Is it causally closed inside the universe? Answer is no, because the question of why the universe, if you're going for sufficient reasoning, you will find that you will always come to a point where the reasoning is not sufficient. And for example, let me take scientific laws. You can say Newton's laws are like this, okay, and these are good laws, and they work and so on. But you can ask a rhetorical question: why these laws, why not some other laws? Okay, these laws are not self justified, they are not self evident. Okay, so there is a sense in which something leaves a sense of not completely justified. In that sense, there is something external. But if you're talking about, is somebody interfering into the working of the universe? Answer is no. Did I answer that question completely? I'm not sure.
I think part of it was, does everything in the universe is it caused by something? Is everything caused?
Yes, everything is caused, everything is lawful, everything is rational. But there are principles of reasoning. For example, let's say you can take Occam's razor, right? You can say that the laws have to be the simplest. Okay, and somebody can say, what is the justification for simplicity? At that point, you will say, well, simplicity is self-evident. Okay, but you can't do that with natural laws or laws of physics or anything. Why these axioms, why these laws, why not some other laws? At that point you say, I can't justify it, but I know it is a fact. But there is a justification outside the universe.
Gotcha. Yep, I think that answers his question. Uh, Ozen says, do you believe that Christianity, Islam, and other religions are just seeing different aspects of the same Vedic perfect knowledge entity?
um, it'll take a very long time to answer this question, but let me go a little bit uh, into the history of, and I'll just briefly talk about, before Christianity, Islam, and Judaism existed, they were pagan religions, right? So the philosophy of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism is heavily influenced by the philosophy of paganism. Okay, and the philosophy of paganism is what we call in Vedic philosophy the idea of demigods and demons and ascetics. There are three classes of living entity. Let's say, let me just confine them not to asceticism, but just to demigods and demons. Demigod and demons are again English words, but there is no other word to use. But therefore, I'll use the word. So pagan religions were essentially doing worships of many demigods and many demons. And the monotheistic religions kept the philosophy in the sense that what is the ideology of a religion that worships, demigods or demons, and merged all the demigods and demons into one god and one Satan. Okay. So, from a Vedic philosophy perspective, they are not their monotheistic God or the conception of God in terms of the person who rewards and punishes and sends people to heaven and hell, and there is an end of the universe at which people are judged and things. All these concepts, they are not. They are basically pagan concepts. They are reformulated, or merged. Many of these concepts are merged into that. But so, from a Vedic philosophy perspective, there is a realm of demons and demigods. There are some people do it, but that is not considered supreme religion or whatever. People still do it. Uh, and so, are these aspects? Yes, you can say in a way they are present. If you for example study the different system of demigods, there is a very close similarity between Egyptian mythology, Babylonian mythology, Roman, Greek mythology, and whatever the Indian system of demigods is. So, in that sense, there are these things existed as pagan religions. They were unified or somehow simplified into monotheism, but the philosophy, essentially remained unchanged. In that sense, there are aspects, but uh, I have a book on this called Cosmic Theogony, because there's a book on theogony written by a Greek ancient Greek author, and he tried to describe all these so-called divine entities and gods and things like that. And there's an extensive discussion about all these systems of gods that have existed across cultures. What are the similarities? What are the differences? And and how they are grouped in Vedic philosophy into three groups, right? uh, and that's it. So somebody has to read that, and it'll be interesting if you're interested in that topic.
Cool. We have been going for about an hour. It was really great to have you on. Appreciate the conversation. Do you have any links or references where people can find out more about your work?
I have a website. It's called shabda.co, shabda.co. So there are a lot of links. If you there's a link on books, so you can go. It's so behind this shabda.co, there are 5 or 6 different sites. So it's shabda.co is a front end. There is a blog site. There is a forums. A lot of people come and discuss questions. There is a site for books. There is a site for videos and presentations and so on. So there's a lot of material if you're interested.
Gotcha. And we did have one last question come in while we were checking. What is the most important bit of evidence that leads to your confidence in Vedism? What falsifiable test can you do to recheck that evidence?
Uh, Greatest confidence comes from practice and experience. And when you start, you might have a lot of doubts. We can give you some philosophy and things like that. You can question that, but that's why philosophy is not central to it, because people might say, well, you have this view and that view, and things like that. So ultimately, it's experience, and that experience is very clearly described in terms of a path. Like if I tell you you're going from point A to point B, it's not just that you keep on going and you get to point B. It's there are milestones, right? For example, if you go on this road, you will see this, this building on your right and that river on your left and that forest on in front of you, and the weather will change and so on. So the same thing. There are, there is a process. There are steps in the process, and if you and you would, if you practice it, you would see changes and new experiences within you. Okay, you would see dramatic changes in you, and it is by that experience and by the fact that you like that experience, right? You would be convinced.
Gotcha. All right. Thanks again for coming on. Really appreciate it. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.